Let him watch. Part 2, Arthur is willing to pay Celia and Dwight for another show. Though no one was around to overhear us, Arthur leaned toward me, bringing his lips to my ear. I'd love to watch you and Dwight again, and I'm more than happy to pay for the privilege of doing so. He then went on to tell me just how much he would pay. My eyes widened at his offer. I floundered helplessly, unsure of how to reply. Arthur's words, and his nearness, started an insistent pulse of excitement low in my belly. That pulse almost instantly traveled. Yet I couldn't stop myself from saying, I don't understand. A man like you doesn't need to pay to watch. Arthur straightened up. Even in the shadows, I could discern his solemn expression. I miss my wife terribly, Celia. While I'm not ready to start dating again, I still have certain needs. For months now, I've taken care of those needs myself. But watching you and Dwight tonight, and coming just as you orgasmed, it made me feel so alive. I dared to reach for his hand as I whispered, I understand. His shoulders visibly relaxed. Take some time to think it over, and discuss it with Dwight, he said. Can I give you my card? Still a bit stunned, I managed to nod. Arthur took a business card from his wallet and held it out to me, along with a very generous amount of cash. I told Mona I'd give you your tip when I found you. I took care of her as well, thank you. I even stumbled over those simple words, my pleasure, Celia. Hope I hear from you soon. With a playful wink, he turned and strode around the building. I waited until he was out of sight before going inside. After a brief trip to the restroom to finish cleaning up, I returned to waiting tables. Dwight kept flashing me sly grins, which I did my best to ignore. Only when we'd closed up the bar and were ready to leave did I approach him. Got a minute to talk? Of course, he said. My car okay? I nodded. Once we'd said goodnight to Mona and made sure she was safely inside her car, I settled into the passenger seat of Dwight's old Mustang. He immediately reached for me, but I held up a hand and blurted out, Arthur is willing to pay us to have while he watches. When I told him how much Arthur would pay, his shock mirrored my own. What? I was relieved that he didn't reject the idea outright. I haven't talked specifics with him yet, I went on. I wanted to make sure you're interested. Dwight turned farther in the driver's seat so that we faced each other. A streetlight provided some illumination, but I was glad to hide in the shadows it didn't reach. Do you have a thing for this guy? He asked. I started to say no, then realized that would be a lie. After tonight, maybe I did have a thing for Arthur. But right now, it was an attraction I wanted to nurture from a safe distance. You're the one I'm fucking, I pointed out. Placing a hand on his thigh, I added, wouldn't you like to earn that kind of money while doing something we both very much enjoy? If I were completely honest, I'd admit that I was willing to do it for free. Having Arthur watch us earlier made me more aroused than I'd ever been before, but I guess Dwight would need the monetary incentive to go along with such an arrangement. My palm slid higher until I reached his, though he moaned at my touch. He asked, you sure we can trust him? Absolutely. A grin formed on my lips. Seeing as how you're already getting hard, I think the idea of him watching us turns you on. The idea of fucking you again is what turns me on, he said. But alright, I'm game. My pulse quickened at his words. Hadn't I been hoping to hear them? I'll let Arthur know. He looked down at my hand working between his thighs. You shouldn't be a tease, playing with my Ike this. Who says I'm teasing? When Dwight reached for me again, I let him pull me onto his lap. It didn't take long for him to move the seat back, and for me to free his. He actually pulsed in my grasp. I can't get enough of you, he growled. You look so sweet and innocent. I never would have guessed how dirty you are. Do you like me dirty? I asked while straddling his thighs. I fucking love it. I rewarded him by sinking down onto his hard. With my hands on his shoulders, I began to move at a fervent pace. We've got to stop fucking at work, I told him through a grin. I'm not sure I can. Dwight leaned back against the seat, gazing up at me. I'm always ready for your sweet pussy, Celia. His words made me ride him even faster. I loved the way he filled me completely, heightening my lust until I was right on edge. "And I'm always ready to be your naughty little slut." Dwight's hips gave a fierce upward thrust while he held me fast. As our fucking grew frenzied, devoid of all control, I imagined Arthur watching us. The fantasy made me come in record time, and Dwight's loud groan let me know he was close as well. I couldn't help but wonder if he was imagining the same thing. My wail sounded especially loud in the confines of Dwight's car. Even as I shook in his grip, I continued bouncing up and down on his, doing everything I could to prolong my bliss. "I'm almost there," he warned, "come inside me." With previous partners, I'd always insisted on condoms, though I had an IUD. But I was consumed by a wild need for Dwight to me with no barrier, and to feel him flood my with his. It was as if my body craved every drop, and he didn't need convincing. After driving his inside me with yet another powerful thrust, he came hard. I could feel the shudder coursing through him while he gave me what I so longed for. This time, I kept Dwight inside me. Resting my head against his, I closed my eyes while he stroked my back. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he whispered. "We can always tell him no." I didn't hesitate to reply, "I'm sure." Maybe I answered too quickly, for I felt him tense a little beneath me. "Think of what we could do with the money," I added. Dwight was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he said, almost grudgingly, "I guess we'd be fools to turn it down." When I contacted Arthur the next day, I struggled to hide my nervousness, yet his warm voice quickly put me at ease. Once we'd gotten the arrangements for payment out of the way, we decided on the following Monday evening for our get-together. Which happened to be one of the rare nights when both Dwight and I were off work. Just before we ended the call, Arthur's voice lowered to a murmur. "I'm so looking forward to this, Celia." Though I realized how ridiculous it was to feel a rush of pleasure at his words, I grinned like a silly teenager. "Me, too." On Monday night, Dwight picked me up at my apartment. I'd bought a new dress for the occasion, and while its bold red color suited me, I had to resist the urge to tug it farther down my thighs. The fabric was clingy, accentuating my every curve. "My God, you're gorgeous." Dwight's stare moved up and down my body as he spoke, and I noticed the growing heat in his brown eyes. He'd dressed in jeans and a nice button-up shirt. I liked that he'd left the top buttons undone. "You look pretty damn fine yourself." Dwight wrapped an arm around me as we walked to his car. I was glad to be able to hold on to him, for I didn't feel all that steady in my 4-inch black heels. "Are you nervous?" he asked. I was nervous, but I didn't want to admit it. "We've done this before, yeah, but that wasn't planned. Tonight, it's like we're performing." He opened the passenger door of the Mustang for me. Before I climbed into the car, I studied his face through dusk's deepening shadows. "Are you nervous?" Dwight flashed a smile that bordered on cocky. "Trust me, sweetheart. I'll be able to perform." During the drive to Arthur's house, we worked each other into a state with furtive caresses and kisses stolen at red lights. With my hand between Dwight's thighs, I could easily feel how hard he was for me. When we reached Arthur's neighborhood, Dwight let out a low whistle. "Check out these mansions, Celia." Looking around, I understood what Dwight meant. We didn't belong here. Arthur lived in a sprawling one-level dwelling, with a perfectly landscaped lawn and an attached garage. "It's a gorgeous place," I said, simply to fill the silence in the car. Dwight parked in front of the closed garage door. "Yeah, I don't feel bad about taking this guy's money," he muttered. "Hey." I placed a hand on his arm. "Arthur's a good man. He lost his wife last year, he's lonely, and I understand." Dwight released a sigh, but then he offered me a reassuring smile. "I promise I won't be an asshole." We headed toward the front door, hand in hand. Arthur was quick to let us in after Dwight rang the doorbell, and he greeted us as though we were old friends. "Come on in," he said, giving my dress an appreciative stare. "You look absolutely beautiful, Celia." I blushed at his compliment, all the while hoping Dwight didn't notice. "Thank you, Arthur, please make yourself at home." He was still wearing office attire, and I wondered how late he'd worked that evening. Had he kept himself busy at his desk until the very last moment? His tie was gone, and he'd rolled his shirt sleeves up his forearms, while he closed and locked the door, engaging the security system. Dwight and I took off our shoes. I was happy to be rid of the uncomfortable heels. "You have a really nice place," Dwight said, as Arthur explained that he was thinking of selling. Since the house was too large for one person, I tried not to be obvious in glancing around. Instead of checking out the expensive decor, I found myself studying a large painting on the living room wall. It was of a stunning woman who appeared to be in her mid-40s. Her blonde hair was styled in an elegant updo. And as she sat in a high-backed chair with her hands folded in her lap, I noticed the wedding ring she wore. Her gaze was almost dreamy, focused on something in the distance, and her smile, while faint, held an unmistakable happiness. I ended up being way too obvious, for Arthur paused at my side and said quietly, "That's my late wife, Melody." "Beautiful," was all I could say while gazing up at her portrait. Yes, she was. Arthur's voice grew thick with emotion, and I feared I'd only worsened his grief. Yet he quickly recovered. Turning to Dwight, he said, "How about I make the three of us some drinks? I won't even pretend to be as skilled at it as you are, Dwight. But you're here for pleasure, not work." "Oh, I'm happy to make them," Dwight said. He set about preparing 3 Jack and Ginger cocktails, completely at home behind Arthur's bar. As I took several sips of my drink, I wondered for the countless time why Arthur spent so many evenings at my workplace. Maybe he sensed the potential danger in drinking alone, especially while grieving. We made small talk as the liquor served to relax us. It was only when Arthur suggested that we go to the bedroom that my stomach again churned with nervousness. Dwight slipped an arm around my waist while we followed Arthur to a wing located at the back of the house. I sensed that this was where guests would stay, while beautifully decorated. It didn't have that lived-in feeling which came from regular use. The bed was king-sized, and Arthur had already drawn back the covers. A comfortable chair was strategically placed at the bedside. Imagining him sitting there, watching, made me shiver with excitement. In the lamp's soft light, I saw lube and condoms on the nightstand. Arthur followed my gaze, looking a little embarrassed as he said, "I wanted to make sure you have everything you need." I gave him a grateful smile. "I appreciate your thoughtfulness, but we won't be needing the condoms, or the lube," Dwight chimed in. He gently pulled me to him so that my back was pressed firmly against the front of his body. I gasped when he began lifting my dress to expose even more of my thighs. "Would you like to see just how wet Celia gets?" Arthur's eyes locked with mine. "I'd love to see that." I was thankful that Dwight was taking charge tonight. It was so easy for me to bend to his will when our wants were the exact same. After Arthur sat down in the chair, Dwight guided me to the bed. He perched on the edge of the mattress, directly in front of Arthur, then pulled me onto his lap. "Spread your legs," Dwight told me in a low voice. Again, I looked at the older man before me. The blatant desire on his face made me brave, and I readily parted my thighs, draping a leg over either side of Dwight's. My dress was now bunched around my hips. At the sight of my red thong, Arthur released a moan. Dwight's fingers were tender in drawing the crotch of my panties aside. I was shaved smooth, and the air felt cool against my folds. Dwight's mouth grew hungry at my neck. "She's already dripping," he said to Arthur. "Oh, I can tell." A sly smile appeared on Arthur's lips. "Why don't you make her even wetter with your mouth, Dwight?" Dwight actually growled with barely restrained lust. Yet he whispered in my ear, "Do you want me to eat your baby? You know how much I love to." I did know. The first time we slept together, he made me come twice just from oral. "Yes." I cried as my hips began rocking. Dwight laughed softly at my obvious need. When I slid from his lap, he stood and gave me a fervent kiss. I could hear Arthur breathing faster. When I stood in just my panties, Dwight dropped to his knees and pulled them down my legs. Before I could move toward the bed, he cupped mine in his hands and buried his face between my thighs. I moaned at the feel of his tongue coaxing my outer apart. Turning my head toward Arthur, I saw that he was stroking himself through his pants. I ached to see his again, but I knew he would reveal it to me in his own good time. After teasing me with his tongue, Dwight stood and kissed me again. I tasted my on his lips. Reaching between us, I stroked his hard dick, which made his mouth grow even more demanding against mine. Finally, we climbed onto the bed. I rested my head against a pillow, then reached for Dwight. He slid on top of me, planting kisses on my mouth and neck before moving to my breasts. My tits were on the smaller side, but I had large, sensitive. The moment he latched onto one of them and began suckling, I mewled with pleasure. My stare met Arthur's. I watched as he took out, which was fully erect. It wasn't quite as thick as Dwight's, but it was a little longer. I loved how his tip was already flushed and enticing pink. Dwight took my between his teeth, giving it a gentle bite. The sensation caused my hips to buck against him. Again, he laughed while traveling down my body. Leaning back in the chair, Arthur grasped the base of his but didn't immediately begin stroking. As Dwight settled between my thighs, I felt that my senses were utterly overwhelmed. Smell and taste, sound and sight, it all blurred in a heady rush of arousal. I knew it wouldn't take long for Dwight to make me climax. His breath was warm against my inner folds. With his fingertips, he massaged easing my hood farther back. Oh my God, yes. Gazing down at Dwight, I knew I looked pleading. And I knew how much that excited him. His tongue was eager in exploring yet it merely circled I realized he took pleasure in teasing me. Arthur seemed to be teasing himself as well. Instead of jerking off, he fondled his cockhead, using only the lightest touch. His fingertips gathered up the precum he readily produced. Watching his tongue glide over his lower lip, I wondered if he longed to taste me, the way I longed to taste him. Please, I begged Dwight. Please make me come, such a greedy girl, he murmured. Yet he enthusiastically licked and sucked my clit while gently thrusting his fingers inside me. Even as my moans grew louder, I knew Arthur could easily hear how wet I was. Dwight brought me right to the edge. My thighs shook as if bearing the brunt of my impending orgasm. But then he lifted his head, making me whine in protest. Withdrawing his fingers from he held them up for Arthur to see. His skin was slick with my juices. Ah yes, she's desperate to come. Arthur groaned. Now, he did begin stroking. Dwight slid his fingers into his mouth, licking them clean. His expression was so full of lust that it made me quake all over. Without warning. Though I shrieked at the exquisite sensation, I shamelessly begged for more. Arthur spoke my name in a low, commanding voice. As I turned my face toward him, my cries bordered on screams. I understood that he wanted to see me reach that peak, just as he had that night behind the bar, and I let him witness my orgasm, so powerful that I felt it was taking me apart. Clawing at the bed, I released a short scream before the contraction struck me silent. My eyes rolled while Dwight's mouth continued its pleasuring. Once I was finally able to focus on Arthur again, I found he was practically panting with excitement. I was still trembling from the orgasm when Dwight kissed his way back up to my mouth. Looking over at Arthur, he asked with a grin, "What would you like us to do next?" Arthur's hand paused midway down his shaft. With his other hand, he cupped his balls, rolling them in his palm. "I want Celia to ride he said. "And I want to see her face when you make her come again." Dwight's eyes met mine, and I nodded. It was hard to think clearly when I'd just come so hard. But then again, rational thought wasn't required here. Dwight again took control, guiding me into place. After he lay on his back, he eased me on top of him. I got into the reverse cowgirl position, straddling his thighs. Arthur eagerly watched as I grasped Dwight slowly. I took it inside me, inch by inch. My cries sounded like they were straight, but I couldn't hold back, not when Dwight's thick was filling me, pressing against my inner walls. His groans let me know he enjoyed it just as much. When I settled all the way down upon him, I carefully leaned back, planting my palms against his upper body. Now, with my thighs spread and my on display to Arthur, I indeed felt like a naughty. His stare lingered on my cunt before drifting upward to my face. "You're so fucking sexy, Celia." Grinning at his words, I started riding Dwight. He kept a firm hold on my hips, giving me the support I needed to him at a fervent pace. Yes, yes, take my, he urged. Arthur seemed spellbound while witnessing my sliding up and down the length of Dwight's. You like seeing me stretch her tight? Dwight asked him in a husky voice. So much, and I love how she can't get enough of it. Arthur started stroking faster, and I noticed his rhythm matched my own. Was he imagining me riding him? It was then that I realized just how much I wanted to. I wanted to feel him inside me, thrusting away as we neared climax. I grew wild, eager for another orgasm. It was already building in my core. I'm gonna come. I wailed. Both Dwight and Arthur urged me on. I could tell from the sound of Dwight's uneven breaths that he was struggling to last. Despite all his talk of doing this just for the money, it was clear that being watched excited him, too. I held Arthur's stare as the first spasms gripped me. Again and again, my contracted around Dwight's, and my shaking caused me to lose all rhythm. Just before reaching his own release, Dwight shouted. His fingertips dug into my flesh, hard enough to bruise. That delicious pain sent a series of aftershocks rolling through my entire body, while Dwight emptied his balls inside my. Arthur continued. I knew he was achingly close. Before I fully realized what I was saying, I cried out, I want to feel your cum all over me. He gasped at my filthy words, yet he was quick to stand and close the distance between us. Slowly, I leaned back against Dwight. With his strong hands, he held my upper body slightly aloft. I felt like an offering laid out before Arthur. He knelt beside me and Dwight. The abject need twisting his features rendered him almost unrecognizable. I was soon rewarded with spurt after spurt of it. His thick seed painted my breasts and rained down on my stomach. He grunted and gasped, jerking his until he was completely spent. I stared down at myself, grinning at the mess Arthur had made, but before I could utter a word, he cupped a hand against the back of my head. Leaning forward, he planted a kiss on my temple, then whispered, "Thank you for making me feel alive again."